Russia didn't just stop publishing its birth rates. It erased them, like a gambler hiding the score before the final round. On July 2nd, 2025, the Kremlin quietly pulled its demographic data. No birth numbers, no death counts, no migration reports. Just a blank page, where the lifeblood of a nation used to be. And this was not a glitch. I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today I'll take you inside Russia's vanishing future. The numbers they erased, the crisis they can't stop, and what it means when a country starts lying, not to the world, but to itself. The government offered no explanation for why it blinded the country. In demographics, two numbers matter most: deaths and births. And Russia has a problem with both. Was it because of the war casualties? Independent trackers now estimate between 170,000 and 250,000 Russian soldiers killed since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. Add in the wounded and missing, and the total number of war casualties climbs past 750,000, according to a recent audit prepared for US lawmakers. But the thing is, the vast majority of contract soldiers fighting for a few $1,000s a month come from Russia's lowest social strata: ex-convicts, men from rural backwaters, and depressed towns. In Russia's rigid social hierarchy, these people are seen as expendable. They are not expected to value their own lives, and the system certainly doesn't value them either. Putin himself believes men like that are better off dying for his imperial fantasies than dying from vodka or a prison fight. I'll give you an example. A former classmate of mine, now a big boss running a major company, regularly gets calls from the governor's office demanding records for the war. I asked him if he ever refused. He said, "Nobody wants problems with the governor. We just pick the most gullible, the least valuable employees, give them a cash bonus, and push them to enlist." "Do you realize you are sending them to die?" I asked. He shrugged. "What do you want me to do? Get my company shut down and leave thousands without jobs? We survive how we can. That's why in Russia, no one really protests the casualty numbers, no matter how staggering. These soldiers were never seen as a national asset. What people like my classmate do fear is something else entirely: the soldiers' return. That's a topic I cover in a separate video. So no, it's not the war dead that forced the government to pull the plug on statistics. The real panic is not about soldiers. It's about babies. In February 2025, Russia recorded just 90,500 newborns nationwide. In 2023, the total fertility rate hit 1.41 children per woman, far below the 2.1 needed for population replacement. Even if the war ended tomorrow, demographers warn that the birth-death imbalance already baked into the system will drain nearly a quarter of Russia's working-age population by mid-century. That's why the spreadsheets vanished. It's a silent admission of colossal state failure. You can hide soldiers killed in action under vague labels like sudden deaths, but you can't hide empty maternity wards. You can't hide half-empty kindergartens. Every children's hospital nurse, preschool teacher, and business owner in the kids sector feels the drop every single day. Without new disposable subjects, there's no future cannon fodder, no future workforce, no tax base to keep the lights on in those endless apartment blocks. So the government pulls the curtains shut, hoping darkness will buy them time, not for Russia's recovery, not for the nation's future, but for themselves. So no one will hold them accountable. At least, not yet. Ask a Russian school kid what their country's greatest treasure is, and they'll probably say oil or gas. But the truth is harsher. The only resource that ever really mattered, and the one Russia can't afford to lose, is people. 1,000 years ago, the forests and frozen plains east of the Vistula River in Poland remained thinly settled. Poor soil, harsh, endless winters, and the absence of natural trade routes made survival very difficult with medieval technology. West of that line, the picture was entirely different. Medieval Europe clustered around bustling market towns where craftsmen, merchants, and monks packed into dense communities, and where goods and ideas traveled with equal ease. That density brought growth, innovation, and death. In the 14th century, the Black Death alone wiped out up to half of Europe's population, turning thriving cities into graveyards and halting development for over a century. War finished the job. From the 30 Years' War to Napoleon's campaigns, scarcely a decade passed without some European army ravaging the countryside. Violence was profitable and convenient. In many cases in Western Europe, you only needed to march several days to plunder your neighbor. In Russia, it took months through the forest and frozen steppe. Moscow stood apart from that cycle of bloodshed. Towns like Kostroma or Vologda never saw a single foreign siege in 300 years. They grew in relative peace, while cities like Lützen and Leipzig burned and rebuilt again and again. Even when plague waves reached Russia, they thinned out, but rarely shattered its scattered settlements. The result? A demographic snowball. By the early 19th century, the Russian Empire had an estimated 36 million people. By 1850, that number hit 69 million. By 1900, it soared to 133 million, a near quadrupling in a single long lifetime. The first full census in 1897 confirmed it. Russia was the largest nation in Europe by a margin of 30 million. Two 19th century breakthroughs turned that raw headcount into real power. First, railroads stitched the countryside to the cities. From just 16 miles of track in 1838 to over 31,000 miles by 1905. Suddenly, a bad harvest in Tambov didn't mean famine, and an army regiment in Kiev could ride the steel rails all the way to the Pacific to crush a local rebellion. Second, modern medicine. When Russian physicians enforced hand-washing in maternity wards, maternal deaths dropped nearly tenfold. Babies who once died began to survive. More infants lived, fewer peasants starved. The empire's human reservoir deepened, and the state dipped into that reservoir with gusto. After defeating Napoleon, Russia kept over 1 million men permanently under arms. During the Crimean War, the number ballooned to 1.7 million, the largest standing force on earth. Losses were staggering. Borodino alone cost up to 42,000 Russian casualties. The Crimean campaign killed 113,000 more, most by disease. And yet, the state barely flinched. Even by 1905, little had changed. At Mukden and Tsushima, Russia lost 50,000 dead and 75,000 captured fighting Japan. And still, General Kuropatkin wrote, "Russia's strength is inexhaustible." That confidence shaped everything. Want a city on the Baltic? Draft 40,000 peasants to haul granite. The villages will refill in a generation. Want influence in the Balkans? March 500,000 conscripts south. If 80,000 die of cholera, census records shows their younger brothers are already 15 and growing. For 2 centuries, that arithmetic worked. But history has a cruel habit. The moment you believe a resource is infinite is the moment it starts to run out. In the 20th century, Russia kept playing by old rules, treating manpower like a bottomless stockpile, even as the supply of new people steadily shrank. The decline began in the cities. A woman born around 1900s had on average 7 children. Her daughters, born in the 1920s, had just 2 or 3. Those born in the 1950s dipped below 2, the first time in Russian history. The post-World War II baby boom that packed strollers from Cleveland to Copenhagen never arrived east of the Vistula. Russia became one of the few European countries where demographers class the baby boom as weak or absent. Why did Russia's decline start a generation earlier than in Western Europe? First, the cost of space. After Stalin's industrialization drive, urban living space averaged just 5.6 square meters per person, barely the size of a prison cell with a hot plate. In Moscow's communalki, dozens of strangers shared a kitchen, a toilet, and every bitter argument. When Khrushchev launched mass housing in 1957, the average rose to 7 square meters, still half the French norm. Couples often delayed a second child simply because there was nowhere to put the crib. Second, the missing men. World War II alone wiped out 26 million Soviet citizens, including at least 8 million soldiers. Add in the Gulag, collectivization, famines, and the post-war purges, and the male population took a crushing hit. By 1950, the USSR had only 76 men for every 100 women of marriageable age. Women pulled double shifts on factory floors and in Russian lines, while Soviet abortion laws filled the gap. In 1965, the USSR recorded 5.5 million abortions, roughly 3 terminations for every live birth. Third, the missing grandparents. Urbanization pulled young families into cities, but their parents stayed behind on collective farms. With no babushka to help raise toddlers, having 3 or 4 children became logistically impossible for 2 working parents. And then people simply left. Between 1918 and 1922, 2 million fled with the white emigre wave. What had happened to them? Read my novel, The White Ghosts Empire. After 1945, countless Soviet displaced persons, mostly POWs and forced laborers, refused repatriation. Starting in the 1970s, 1.6 million Jews and their relatives immigrated to Israel, the US, and Germany. Since 1992, a post-Soviet brain drain has removed 2 million professionals, hollowing out universities, labs, and research centers. Between 1990 and 2024, Russia saw 54 million births. Had it simply held the replacement rate of 2.1, that number would have been 70 million. Factor the children those missing adults would have having now, and Russia in 2025 could have counted 165 million people instead of the official 146 million. Enough to fill 2 more cities the size of Moscow. But this isn't a one-time loss. It's a rolling echo. Every small generation grows up to have an even smaller one. Yet Russia never adjusted its strategy. The Kremlin kept planning wars, mega projects, and pension systems as if peasant families would go on producing an infantry squad per household. They did not. They won't. Because the key inputs, space, stability, and extended family, are gone. When Russian officials talk about building a Russian world stretching from Ukraine to Kamchatka and beyond, they are still using 19th century math the kind where every new decade brought millions of extra subjects. But today Russia is shrinking even on paper. The last confirmed fertility rate was 1.41 children per woman, a number that guarantees long-term population decline. And even if you've seen websites claiming a sudden jump to 1.83 in 2024, don't buy it. That figure comes from a misread UN projection. The actual UN numbers for Russia forecast just 1.46 for both 2024 and 2025. Even those modest figures are padded. Until recently, Russian stats counted babies born to recent immigrants as if they were native Russians. And those newcomers aren't few. Strip them out, and the fertility rate for ethnic Russians drops even further. Want to see reality up close? Look at regions barely touched by Central Asian migration. Novgorod, last recorded fertility rate, 1.26. Vladimir, 1.15. Smolensk, 1.03. Barely half their replacement rate. Novgorod alone has lost 30% of its population over the last 35 years, dropping from 750,000 to 550,000. Demographers expect another 200,000 to vanish by the 2040s, leaving a territory the size of Croatia with less than a tenth of Croatia's population. Roads, schools, hospitals, all built for a different century, will either be shuttered or left to rot. No budget can sustain full services across empty forests. The Kremlin knows there's a huge problem with Russia's population, but it can't do anything about it. Because the only solution that could make a real difference is this: stop the war and give ordinary people, not the elites, but the average Mikhail and Masha, a sense that they can raise children without fear, with at least 20 years of economic stability ahead. Everyone remembers what the economic collapse of the 1990s looked like, and people can feel that hard times are coming again. So they do their own calculation. It's easier to survive a crisis without small children. The Kremlin has tried nearly everything short of cloning. In 2007, the maternity capital voucher scheme bumped fertility by about 0.15 children per woman. But only by nudging some couples to have their second child sooner during the oil boom of 2008 to 2012. When that boom faded, lawmakers went after abortion access, floated mandatory gynecological permission slips, and even banned child-free propaganda in 2024. This year, they started offering lump sum bonuses to pregnant schoolgirls and even launched a reality show, Mom at 16, urging teens to have babies now and finish their education later. These measures make headlines. They don't make babies because the deeper forces point the other way. The government just stopped publishing monthly birth figures, a silent admission that the future is too grim for public release. Into this vacuum pour labor migrants, up to 14 million, mostly from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. These countries are far poorer than Russia, and their fertility rates still hover around 3 children per woman. That's why young men come to Russia looking for cash and often bring their families. Recently, Russian business groups floated the idea of bringing in up to 1 million Indian workers to fill labor gaps, a claim quickly denied by the Labor Ministry, which insists quota for Indian citizens remain capped at around 72,000 for 2025. Still, the push reflects growing pressure from industries desperate for manpower as Russia's working-age population shrinks. With native birth rates in freefall and war draining the younger male workforce, Moscow is quietly expanding labor migration programs, even as official rhetoric avoids admitting just how dependent the country has become on foreign hands. Moscow needs them to keep construction sites running, to prop up tax revenues, to delay pension fund collapse, to keep the military from running out of records. But nationalist TV rails against them, claiming they'll soon outnumber ethnic Russians. And in some parts of Moscow and nearby satellite towns, dense clusters of Asian families preserve their language and traditions rather than assimilate. There is no alternative. Without migrant labor, the system collapses. And if current trends hold, by the time today's toddlers finish college, Russia will have 25 to 30 million Asian-born residents. Factor in the high birth North Caucasus, and Orthodox Slavs could become just one group among many, with Russian just one of many languages spoken in city buses. That prospect terrifies a government whose legitimacy hinges on restoring a Russian empire. But instead of facing the numbers, officials trot out tired slogans about traditional families and promise ever larger maternity payouts. The math, however, is merciless. You can't sustain imperial ambitions on a population base that melts away faster every year. And you certainly can't revive it by throwing cash at pregnant teenagers while your most educated citizens line up for one-way flights. Will Russia lose the war in Ukraine because of its demographic collapse? The answer is complicated. Ukraine's numbers are even harsher. In 2023, Statista put Ukraine's fertility rate at 0.98. A historic low after war, blackouts, and mass flight shattered normal family life. But holding conquered land, that's a different challenge. Classic counterinsurgency doctrine says you need 20 security personnel per 1,000 inhabitants to control a hostile population. To hold all of pre-war Ukraine, now roughly 29 million people after displacement, Russia would need around 580,000 troops on the ground, and they'd have to keep them there for decades. That's roughly the size of Russia's entire force at the front today. And the draft pool for a vast country with exposed borders and scattered military bases? Just 1.27 million young men. This dragon simply doesn't have the body mass to swallow its prey. But the men in charge are Cold War fossils, averaging 71 years old, convinced their power depends on looking dangerous. TV anchors still talk about victory parades in Warsaw and tell citizens they are the luckiest people on earth. One state TV guest even urged schools to prepare our children to fight because this is World War III. The gap between their bravado and real life widens every month. Yes, the dragon can still scorch towns on its borders, but inside, it's hollowing out. If this opened your eyes, share it. Not for me, but for those still clinging to the old myths about Russia's future, because in this video, you saw why Russia's real collapse won't start with war or sanctions. It's already happening in maternity wards, in empty classrooms, and in shrinking, hollowed-out society. And if you want to go deeper, join our think tank or buy me a coffee. Or check out my other channel, Elvira Bary Forbidden Books, for stories and short films by independent Russian authors, not backed by the government. Thank you for watching and for staying curious, even when the truth feels uncomfortable.